Alright, so recently Firebase introduced version 9 of the library, and the way we use version 9 is a bit different to how we've been using Firebase in the past with previous versions. But before I get into those differences and talk about them, I wanted to give everyone who's completely new to Firebase a whirlwind tour of what it is. So, Firebase is what's known as a backend as a service, and that means that it provides backend services like a database, authentication, file storage, cloud functions, hosting, and other things as well, and we can plug those services directly into our front-end applications or websites to make use of them. And Firebase then takes care of all of the server-side logic and heavy lifting so that we as developers don't need to focus much on it at all. So it's an alternative to setting up our own backend infrastructure using tools like MongoDB and a Node.js server. So instead, Firebase handles all of that for us, and we can focus more on the front end of our applications and the end user experience. It's really simple to get started with, and most of its features are completely free for small personal websites. So, to use it, the first thing you need to do is head to the Firebase website at firebase.google.com and sign up for a free account. You should see a sign up button in the top right somewhere, and once you've done that, you should see a link instead that says something like go to console. So click on that to go to the Firebase console, and your Firebase console is where all of your Firebase projects are listed. Generally speaking, for each different website or application that you create, you normally have a new Firebase project for it. Anyway, before we make a new project, first I want to talk about some of the differences between Firebase version 8 and the new Firebase version 9. So the major change in version 9 of Firebase is that it now adopts a more modular and functional approach, meaning that we only import the Firebase functions that we need from the libraries and not those we don't need. In contrast, version 8 used a more object-oriented approach where we called those functions or methods directly on Firebase objects. But by using a more functional approach and only importing the functions that we need, we can take advantage of something called tree shaking, which is where any unused code or functions can be removed from our final bundled JavaScript file. To do that, we'll need to use a module bundler like Webpack or Rollup, but we'll talk more about that in the next lesson. For now, the main takeaway point is that using Firebase 9 in this functional way means more optimized output code and a smaller file size. Now, if we quickly take a look at the code examples on the Firebase docs, we can see the difference in how we use Firebase 8 and 9 by switching between the two tabs. And you'll notice that when we select version 9, the individual functions that we need are imported from the Firebase libraries. But when we select version 8, the functions are called directly on the Firebase object. So this is the major difference between how Firebase versions 8 and 9 differ. And we'll be seeing how to use version 9 using the Firestore database and the Firebase Auth service in this series. First up though, we need to set up a module bundler like Webpack in order to use the new Firebase version and take advantage of that tree shaking feature. But just two more things really quickly before we start. First of all, I've created course files for this series, and you can find them at this repo right here, Getting Started with Firebase 9. So the link to this is going to be down below, and there's a different branch for every lesson in this series. So if you want to see the code for lesson 7, for example, select the lesson 7 branch and you're going to see all the code and folders right here. If you want to download a zip folder of this lesson, you can do that by clicking on this button and then going to download zip. Alright, so also you'll need Node.js installed on your computer for this course as well. So if you don't have it installed already, go to nodejs.org and then download this version right here. By the way, if you want to watch this entire course now without YouTube adverts, you can do. It's all up on the NetNinja website, netninja.dev. You can buy the course for $2 to get instant access to all of it, or you can sign up to NetNinja Pro and get instant access to all of my courses without adverts, as well as premium courses not found on YouTube, including my Udemy ones. That's $9 a month, and you can get your first month half price when you use this promo code right here. So I'm going to leave this link down below in the video description for you to sign up, and I really hope you enjoy this series, and please do not forget to share, subscribe and like the videos. That really helps a lot, and I'm going to see you in the very next lesson. So then, like I said before, in order to take advantage of tree shaking in Firebase 9 to remove any unused code, we need to use a module bundler like Webpack, because it's the module bundler that bundles our different pieces of imported source code together into a final JavaScript bundle file. And it's that JavaScript bundle that we link to from our HTML page. Now, if you're creating your website with a CLI tool like Create React App or the Vue CLI or something like that, then most of the time Webpack or another module bundler is automatically set up for you. So in those cases, you won't need to manually set it up yourself, and you can go right ahead and just start using Firebase 9 from the get-go. However, if you're not using a CLI tool to build your site and you're just making a regular site using HTML and vanilla JavaScript, then you'll need to set up a module bundler yourself. Now, I don't want to assume that you're using a CLI tool like the Vue CLI or Create React App to build your website. So I'll be showing you how to set up Webpack to bundle our code in this lesson. And then in the next lesson, we'll start to use Firebase 9. So if you want to skip this lesson, if you already know how to do this, then be my guest. So I've already got open a project folder in VS Code which has nothing in it at all to begin with. The first thing I'm going to do is create a source folder, which is where all of our source JavaScript code is going to live. And inside that, I'm going to make a new index.js file, which will be our JavaScript entry file. So this is the file that we'll be writing all of our JavaScript code in later on. The next thing I'll do is create a dist folder. Now, this is where our final bundled JavaScript code is going to live, and we'll specify that to Webpack shortly. Also inside this folder, I'm going to create an index.html file. This will be the web page that we serve to the browser, and we'll hook that up later to our bundled JavaScript file. So we don't link to the source JavaScript file from here, but to a bundled one when we have it. Now, inside the HTML file, I'm just going to boilerplate a page by typing doc and then hitting tab. Then I'm just going to update the title to say Firebase 9. And also, I'm going to add an H1 in the body. And that's going to say something like getting started with Firebase 9. The next thing we need to do is install Webpack and configure it. To do this, we'll be using npm, the Node Package Manager, so it's important at this point to make sure you have Node.js installed on your computer. If you don't, then you can download it and install it at nodejs.org. Once you've done that, you can open up a terminal, and we're going to type npm init and then -y. This is going to create a new package.json file to keep track of all of our different dependencies that we need to install, and one of those is going to be Webpack. So let's do that. So we need to install Webpack, but also the Webpack CLI. So type now npm I for install, then Webpack, and then Webpack-CLI, and then at the end do -d, capital D, to save this to our dev dependencies. So we're installing two packages here, right? Webpack itself and also the Webpack CLI, which is going to be used to run Webpack. So now that's done, we can go ahead and make a new Webpack config file inside the root of our project directory. So not inside the source folder or the dist folder, but in the root project folder. Now, inside this file is where we configure what we want Webpack to do. What we want it to do is look at our source index.js file and any imports that we have in there later as well, and then bundle all of that code together into a single bundle file. So to do this, we need to export an object which represents our Webpack configuration. Now, I don't want to waste your time by typing all of this configuration out from scratch. So what I'm now going to do is just copy this from the course files and paste it in, and then I'll explain it line by line. So then, first off, we have this module.export, and we export an object from this file. And inside this object, there's different properties which represent the configuration of Webpack for us. So first, we specify a mode. Now that can be production for production, but we're just developing, so I've specified development. Then we have an entry property, and this is the entry file that we need to specify, a path to it. And that says where we want Webpack to initially look for our JavaScript source file. So we say inside the source folder, then index.js. Now we have an output property, and this is an object. Now the first property of that object is a path. So it's a path to whatever folder or directory we want the output file to be put into. Now we want it to be inside the dist folder. Now, in order to create this path, we need to use the path module right here. So we require that. That is a core node module. And then we use that, add a method called resolve on that path object to resolve a new path. This __dir name basically just gets the current directory of this file, and then we say go into the dist folder from here. And this is required because we need an absolute path right here, not a relative one, unlike this. Alright, so after we have the path, we also specify a file name for the output file, which I've called bundle.js. And then finally, after the output property, we have a watch property, which I set to be true. And this is so that when we run Webpack, it's going to watch our file over here. And every time we make a change, it's going to bundle up the new code into the bundle.js file. So then, we will run Webpack, and it will take the source file and any imports inside this file as well. It will bring those in as well and bundle them all together and spit it out inside the dist folder into a file called bundle.js. And like I said, every time we make a change to that file and hit save, because we're watching it, it's going to re-bundle that up. Alright, so now we have that Webpack config file set up. Next, we want to run Webpack to do all of this bundling. So to do this, we'll make a custom script in our package.json file. I'm going to call it build, but you can call it something else if you wish. And then for that, we just set it to be Webpack. So now when we run this script, it will run the Webpack command, and that will automatically look for our Webpack config file and run Webpack according to our configuration. So just before we do that, let's add some code into the source index.js file. I'm just going to add in a simple console log, and then I'm going to save it. But later on, we'll be using file imports in here to import functions from the Firebase library. And that's where the power of module bundlers come into play. For now, I just want to see if this process is all going to work. So now I'll open up a terminal, and I'm going to run our new script by typing npm run and then the name of the script, which is build. And when I do that, Webpack will take our source code and it's going to bundle it into the output file inside the dist folder. And we can see it right there. And it's also going to be watching our index.js file for changes so that it rebundles every time we make a change and then save the file. Now remember, we also need to link to this JavaScript file, the new bundle, from the HTML page. So let's also do that now. So right at the bottom of this page, I'm just going to add a script tag and set the source to be bundle.js. So now if we preview this in a browser, it should show the message in the console, right? Now, to preview the site, you can use any local development server. I'm just using a package called Live Server, which you can install by going to your packages and then searching for Live Server. And it's this package that you want right here. And with that installed, I can just right click on any HTML file and select Open with Live Server. And now in the browser, if I open up the DevTools, then we can see over in the console, hello from index.js. So Webpack has bundled up our code from that source file. It's output it into the bundle file, which we've linked to from our HTML page, which is why we can see it inside the console. So that is Webpack set up. Next up, we're going to start working with Firebase. Alright then, so now we have Webpack set up. The next thing we need to do is create a new Firebase project. So go to your Firebase console at console.firebase.google.com, and then we want to add in a new project, and we need to give this a name. I'm going to call it Firebase 9 Dojo. You can call it what you want, it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to click on continue. We don't need analytics, so just click on create project. Alright, and then click on continue to go to the project dashboard. Now when we create a new Firebase project, we have to make a new front-end application for the project as well. This is the dashboard where we can control the backend, but we need to register a front-end, our application. Now we can have different types of applications. We're going to have a web app, so click on this right here, give it a name. Really doesn't matter what it is. Again, I'm going to call it Firebase 9 Dojo website, something like that. We don't need to set up hosting. Register the application first of all. then it's telling us what we need to do next. Now, all we want to do for now is just go down to continue to console, because we're going to grab this code from somewhere else. So click on continue to console, and now we can see this new app that we've just created. So this represents the front end application, our website, if you like, that's going to connect to this backend, this Firebase project. So click on the cog for this to go to the settings, and then if we scroll down, we want to grab the config object. So click on config right here, and you want to copy this object. Now this config object contains information about our Firebase project, and we need to use it on our front end so that the front end website can connect to our Firebase project and interact with it. So copy that. Alright, and then back in our project, inside the index.js file, I'm going to get rid of this console log right here, and instead I'm going to paste in this new Firebase config object. Alright, so we have this config object, but it's not really doing much at the minute, and we need to basically connect to the Firebase project on the back end from the front end using this object right here. Now the first step in doing that is to install Firebase. So I'm going to open up my terminal again. We still have Webpack running inside this terminal. I'm going to click on this one to open a new one. And then over here, we need to install Firebase. So I'm going to say npm install Firebase like so. And this should install the latest version of Firebase, version 9 in our case. Alright then, so now that Firebase package is installed, we can go ahead and use it to connect to the Firebase backend along with our Firebase config object. Now, before I show you how to do this using version 9, which is what we've installed, I just want to remind you how we did this using a previous version, like version 8 for example. Now, to do that, we would have said import Firebase from Firebase/app. Now, this Firebase/app is the core part of the Firebase library, and this Firebase object that we import will contain a load of different methods that we would use to basically connect to Firebase and initialize different services. So if I wanted to initialize the app or the connection to the Firebase backend, I would say Firebase and then use a method on that Firebase object called initialize app. Like so, and then we would pass in the Firebase config object so it knows what project to connect to. Alright, so we'd use a method on the Firebase object. Now in version 9 we don't do this, we just import the functions that we need to use from the library. So in our case, the function we need to use is this initialize app. So we will get rid of this Firebase thing right here, and instead we will just import a single function from this library, and that is initialize app like so. And then we don't need to call that method on the Firebase object, we just invoke the function that we import right here. And now that connects us to our Firebase backend using this Firebase config so it knows which project to connect to. And that's all there is to it. So there's your first kind of glance into how we're using these different functions from the Firebase library. Next up, I'm going to show you how we can set up a Firestore database, connect to it, and then get data from it. Alright then gang, so now we've connected to our Firebase backend over here. The next thing we want to do is set up a database and then connect to that database from our front end so that we can reach out and grab data from it. So the first thing we need to do is enable that database on the back end. So you can see we have all of these different features right here. The one we want at the minute is the Firestore database. There is this older real-time database as well, but we're going to use this one right here. So click on Firestore database, and then when this page loads, you're going to see a create database button. So click on that and then make sure you start in test mode, otherwise you won't be able to access your data. Now, this is all to do with Firestore rules, and I'm not going to delve into those in this series, but I will do a complete series in the future all about Firestore rules. So make sure you're in test mode and then click on next. Choose a Firestore location and then click on enable. And now we can see it's created this database for us. Alright, so this database is split up into collections and documents. So we would have a collection of a certain data type. For example, in this little application or website that I'm going to make, we're just going to have a data type called books, and they would all be in a collection called books. So I could create that. I'd give this a collection, an ID or a name. I'm going to call it books. And then when we create that, it's asking us to also create a first document inside this collection. Now, each document has to have a document ID so that later on, if we want to grab a single document from the database, we use the ID to get it. Now, I'm going to click on this so that Firebase automatically generates that ID for me, a unique one. Alright, and then inside this document we have different properties and values. Now the property is called a field in Firestore. So for example, I could have a title of a book, right? And the title could be The Name of the Wind. So that's the title of the book. And by the way, we'd specify the data type right here. Now we're sticking with string. I can add a new field, for example, author as well. And I would say that is Patrick Rothfuss. Like so. So I'm going to save that and it should create a new document with that ID inside this book's collection. And we see the two different properties of that document right here. So what I'm going to do now is add a couple more documents, but I'm going to speed this up so you don't have to watch me do it in real time. Alright then, so now we have our Firestore database set up and we've created a few documents inside that Firestore database. Next, I'm going to show you how we can connect this database from the front end, our website, and reach out and grab these different documents so that we can do something with them. Alright, so first off, you can see I've added in a few different comments, and these comments are what we're going to do in this lesson right here. This one is just for initializing the app to begin with. Alright, so the first step is to actually connect or initialize the Firestore service on the front end so we can connect to it. Now to do that, we need to import a function from the Firestore part of the Firebase library. So we say import, then curly braces. Now I'm going to be importing many things inside the next few videos. So what I'm going to do is place them on different lines for each video so they don't go off the screen and way over to the right and we can't see them. So the function we want to initialize the Firestore service on the front end is called get Firestore, and that will be a pattern for the different services that Firebase provides us with. If it was auth that we wanted to initialize, it would be get auth. All right, so you'll see that kind of get and then the service name pattern. So that's a function, and it comes from Firebase /Firestore because this is the service we're using. So all we have to do is invoke this function right here to initialize the service. So I'm going to say const db is equal to get Firestore, like so. And this db is for database, and it represents our database connection, which we're kind of storing in this constant now. And anytime we do something with the database, like reach out to get data, we're going to use this constant right here to do it. Okay, so we've initialized the Firestore service. The next thing we need to do is get a reference to a specific collection in our database. So it's almost like us reaching in a hand and grabbing hold of a specific collection that we want to get data from. And that's called a collection reference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a constant called colref, and that stands for collection ref. Now we need to import a function in order to get a reference to a specific collection, and that function is just collection, and it comes from the Firestore part of the library. So we say collection down here and we invoke that. Then as a first argument we pass through the database, so we know what database to look in for the collection, and as a second argument we say we want the books collection. Now, if you've used previous versions of Firebase, already this is going to look quite different, because previously we might initialize Firestore a slightly different way. We would say something like this, firebase.firestore to initialize it, and then also, oops, not config right here, and also we would store that in a constant as well, so const db is equal to firebase.firestore, and then we would say something like db.collection and then books to get a reference to the books collection. So this is older versions of Firestore or Firebase. But now what we're doing is we're just using the function not on the DB object, but we're just importing that function from the Firestore library. And then we pass the database object in as an argument, and also as a second one, the collection we want to reference to. Now this reference is now being stored inside this constant collection ref. Alright, so the next step is to get the collection data. And again, we just import a function to do that. And that function is called getDocs. So if I come down here, all I need to do is say getDocs, like so, and we pass in the collection ref as an argument. So paste that in. And what this does is go out, look at this collection, and try to retrieve all the documents inside that collection. Now this returns a promise, so we can tack on a then method which fires a function when this task is complete, and this function is going to contain a snapshot of that collection at that moment in time when we reach out to get it, and on that snapshot object we have access to all of the documents. So what I'm going to do to begin with is just say console.log snapshot and then use a property called docs which represent all of the documents. So I'm going to save this now so that we can preview it in a browser. Alright, so now in the browser we can see this array right here of 3 different things, and each of these different objects right here represents a document inside that Firestore collection. Remember, I created 3 documents, right? And we've grabbed all of those 3 documents right here. Now, if we open up each one, there's loads of different properties and also methods on this object. Now, we're not interested in most of this stuff. All we want is the data and maybe the ID of the document as well. Now, the data is grabbed by using a data function right here. So we need to call the data function on each of our documents right here to actually get a data object that contains the title and also the author of each document, right? And then we can also grab the ID property of each document as well. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to cycle through these different documents right here using a for each loop, and I'm just going to grab the data I want from each of those documents so that we can output it in a more elegant way. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to get rid of that console log right here, and instead I'll create a new variable using let, because we're going to change this, and it's going to be called books, and we'll set it equal to be an empty array to begin with. Then what I'm going to do is cycle through the docs on the snapshot right here so that I can add my own custom object which represents each document or each book inside this array. So what I'll say is snapshot.docs and then use the for each method to cycle through those. And then each time around we fire a function for each item. Now we take in that document right here. So I'm just going to call that doc. And then we can do something with that doc each time around. All I want to do is get some data from it and then push that to the array. So I will say books.push, and we're going to push an object to the array each time. So each book is represented by an object. Now, what I want to do is get the data from the document. And remember, the data is the title and the author properties. Now, like I said a minute ago, the way we get the data is by using a data method on the doc object right here. So I can say doc.data to get that, and that returns an object with the different data properties, the title and the author. So what we need to do is spread that into our new object, so using the 3 dots. So it takes those 2 properties and it just outputs them into our new object. Also, I want the ID, and that's going to be a property on my object as well. So we can get that by saying doc.id. So now what we're doing for each of the documents on that snapshot, we are adding a new object to the books array, and for each object we get the data and also the ID of that document. So it's going to look a bit cleaner in the console when we look at those different documents. And now after we've done this for each loop, all I want to do is log out the books. So I can say console.log and then the books array. Alright then, now before we preview this, we can also tack on a catch block down at the bottom. So catch, just in case there's an error. And in which case we get that error in a function which we can fire, and all I'm going to do is log the error to the console if there is one. Now in our case there won't be one because everything is working, but if there is an error then it would log it to the console then. Alright, so let's preview this. Alright, so now in the console we can still see an array of 3 items, each one representing a book. Now if we open up that array, you can see that each object is a bit leaner than before. Now we just have the information on it that we need. So the author property and the title, which comes from the data method we used, and also the ID as well, which is the ID of the document, just in case we need that later on. And in fact, we will need that in the next lesson where I'm going to show you how to delete documents. So we'll use the ID for that, but also add new documents as as well from the front end, not directly in the Firestore database. Alright then my friends, so we've already seen now how to use this function, getDocs, to get all the documents in a given collection, and we pass in a collection ref to that function. Now the collection ref we get by using the collection function, passing in the DB object as a first argument and then specifying what collection we want a reference to. So we're using these functions individually and we're importing those from the Firestore library. Okay, so this is the general pattern of how we're going to be working with Firestore. So that's how to get documents. Now I want to show you how we can add documents and delete documents. So to do this, I've already prepared a little bit of boilerplate code. Inside the index file, I've created two forms and an h2. So we have this h2, then we have a form right here with the class of add, and this is for adding a new document. Inside that, we have a label for the title and also an input for the title. Now the name of this field is title. And then we have a label for author and an input for author, and the name of this is author. We'll be using the name attributes to get the values of these two inputs later on in the JavaScript. Then we have a button to submit the form. We have also a form for deleting a document where we have a label for the document ID and an input field where we put in the document ID and it has a name attribute of ID. When we submit this form, we're going to use the ID value to query a particular document and delete it. So that's the boilerplate HTML, those two forms. This one with the class of add and this one with the class of delete. If we go to the index.js file, I've also added in a bit of JavaScript as well. So we have adding documents and deleting documents. The first thing I do is I store the add form inside this constant right here using the query selector. So we have a reference to that form, and then I attach an event listener to the form. The event is submit, and we fire a function when we submit that form. And we take in the event object and we use that to prevent the default action. Remember, when we submit a form on an HTML page, the default action is that it refreshes the page, and we don't want to do that. So we prevent that default action. And we do the same thing down here for the other form when we're trying to delete a document. We query that first of all and we store it inside this constant delete book form. Then we attach an event listener to that, submit event, fire a function, take in the event object and prevent the default action. So it's inside this function right here that we want to add a new document by grabbing the values for the title and the author. And then down here, we want to delete a document from the Firestore collection by using this value right here, the ID. So let's start with adding documents. So the first thing we need to do is import a function to do this at the top. So I'm going to come to the top, comment after the last import, and then go to a new line because it's a new lecture. And we're going to import the add docs function. So, oops, not add docs, add doc function. So this is the function that we use to add a new document to a specific collection. So down here, all we need to do is use that function. So inside this event listener function right here on the add book form, we want to add doc, and this takes in two arguments. The first argument is a collection reference, so that Firestore knows what collection that we want to add a new document to, because we might have multiple different collections. Now remember, we already have a collection reference right here into the books collection. So all I need to do is grab this constant and then paste it in down here as the first argument. The second argument is an object, and this object represents the new document that we want to add to that particular collection. And remember, the document has different fields. All we need to do is use properties and values for those fields. So our documents need a title property and also an author property. Now all we need to do is grab those property values from our form. Remember, it's this input right here with the name of title and this one with the name of author. Now we can do that easily in JavaScript. All we need to do is grab our form reference, which is stored in this constant add book form. So we grab that, and then we can use dot notation to grab a specific input field inside that form by using the name attribute. So in this case, it would be title, and in this one, author. So I can say add book form dot title to get that title input field, and then dot value to get the value inside that, so whatever a user has typed into it. And I can do the same thing for the author, add book form dot author dot value, like so. So now we have this object with these two properties right here, title and author, and we're calling this function add doc. We're saying look into the books collection and add this as a new document inside there. So this will go out and do it for us. Now it's asynchronous and it will return a promise. So if we want to, we can tack on a then method, which is going to fire a function once this is complete, and then we can do something inside that function. Well, what I'd like to do is reset the form so that it empties the input fields for us and we can easily type in a new one. And to do that, we can use a reset method on the form reference. So grab that, paste it in, and then we can use a method on that called reset, like so, and invoke that. All right then, so let's give this a whirl in the browser. Alright then, so let's give this a whirl. I'm going to go to the title and say The Way of Kings and put in Brandon Sanderson as the author. Click Add New Book and hopefully we'll see the form is reset. That means that it should have worked, but what I'm going to do just to make sure is refresh, and then this array right here should then be 4, because remember when we first load the page we're performing that get request to get all of the documents from Firestore. So let me refresh and now we can see the array is 4, and if we open that up we can see the Way of Kings right here inside that array, so that has worked. Alright then, so now we're adding documents. The next step is to delete the documents. Now to do this we're going to need to import two more things. First of all, we need to import a function to delete a document, and that is delete doc, like so. But then also we need to import a function called doc. Now the doc function is similar to the collection function in that it gets us a reference, but this time instead of getting us a reference to a collection, it gets us a reference to a doc, because in order to delete a document we need a reference to that document to say, look, this is the one we want to delete. All right, so we import those two functions right there. Okay, so down here inside this function, the first thing I want to do is get a reference to the documents that I want to delete. So I'll create a new constant and I'll say doc ref, and I'll set that equal to the doc function and invoke it. So this is how we get a document reference, and this takes in 3 arguments. First of all, the database, much like we did with the collection function up here, we pass in the database, which is this, as a first argument. The second argument again is going to be the collection, so let me copy that and paste that in down here, and this time it has a third argument which is going to be the ID of the document that we want to reference to inside that collection. Now remember, we ask the user to input the ID into this input field, so all we need to do is grab the value of that input field, and we can do that the same way that we grab the values of these input fields. So let me come over here and let me say delete book form, which is the reference to our form, and then the name of that input field, which is ID in this case, so .id .value, and that gets us the ID that a user has entered in to that input field. So now we're storing that inside docref, and now we want to delete that document. So to do that I can call the delete doc function like so, and all we need to do is pass in the docref like so, and that goes out and it deletes that document. Now again, this is asynchronous, so I can tack on a then method if I want to fire a function when it's complete, when it's deleted it, and all I want to do is reset the delete book form. So let me grab that and paste it in here, and then dot reset like so, and invoke that function as well. Alright, so let's save this now and see if it works. Okay then, so I'm just going to open up this array so we can grab the ID of one of these books. We'll just grab the Way of Kings one, the one I just added. So let me copy that ID right there. That's the item I want to delete, right? This book. So all I need to do is paste it inside here and then click on delete book. That should then get a reference to that document in Firestore with that ID, and then it should delete it. So let's give this a whirl. Delete book. And okay, it's cleared the form, which is a good sign. And now if we refresh, our new array in the console should be 3. So let's have a look at that. Yep, we can see 3 now. And if we take a look, the one we just tried to delete, the Way of Kings, is no longer there. Awesome. So that, my friends, has worked. That's how we can add new books and also delete books. Alright then gang, so we've seen now how we can get data and we're logging that data to the console and also add new data and delete data as well from a collection. But at the minute, if we were to add new data or delete data, then in order to see the updated collection data in the console, we'd have to refresh the page, right? Let me demo that. If I add in a new book, so The Way of Kings again, and then Brandon Sanderson, like so, hit enter, it adds the book. But we don't see that new data over here right away. We have to refresh the page in order to see that data. Now, if we were rendering this data to the browser so that it output on the screen in some kind of template, then the same would be true. We'd have to refresh the page after we added a new book in order to see that in the browser, right? So instead what we can do is we can set up what's known as a real-time listener or a subscription to the Firestore collection, which actively listens for changes to that collection, so that if I was to add a new book or change a book or delete a book from that collection, then it would send back the updated snapshot or the updated data inside that collection right away once that happens. And then in our case, it would just be relogging it to the console. But in your case, if you're making a website with Firebase, then it might re-render the template to the browser, okay? So I'm going to show you how we can set up this real-time listener or subscription to a Firestore collection in this lesson. Okay then, so currently we are getting the documents right here using this getDocs function. And like we just explored, this getDocs function just runs once to get the documents when we run the code, just once. But if there's a change later on in the data, it doesn't automatically run again to go out and fetch the new data. It just runs once. And instead, we want to set up a subscription to the collection so that every time there is a change in the data in that collection, we get that data back right away. So it sends us back a new snapshot every time there's a change, right? So what I'm going to do is change this to a real time collection data because that's what we're going to set up now. And then up here, I'm going to replace getDocs with a different function called onSnapshot, which is how we set up a real-time listener using this onSnapshot function. So then what I'm going to do is basically rewrite this code right here, but using that new function. So then let's do that down here. I'm going to say onSnapshot, which is that function we just imported. And then inside here, we need to pass in two arguments. We say call ref, just like we did up here, because we need to pass in a reference to a collection that we want to listen to or set up a subscription to. And then as a second argument, we pass in a function. And this function is going to fire every time there is a change in the collection and it sends us back a new snapshot, and also once initially as well. So like this runs once initially, this is going to run once initially as well to get the data to begin with, but then it's also going to run thereafter, this function, every time there is a change in the collection that we're listening to, and it's going to send us back a new snapshot of that collection after the change occurs, right? So unlike this one, where we have a then method, we don't have a then method on here. We'll just fire this function whenever there's a change. So inside here, we take in the snapshot just like we do up here. And then that snapshot is going to be pretty much the same as this kind of snapshot. So inside this function, the logic, all this stuff is going to be the same. We can set up a new array called books. We can cycle through the documents on the snapshot. And for each document, we add a new object to the books array, where we grab the data of the document and also the ID of the document. And then finally, we log those to the console. So what I'm going to do is actually just cut all of this and I'm going to paste it in right here instead. And let me just scoot this back. All right. And that's all there is to it, my friends. So now I can delete all this where we just get the data once, and instead we're using this onSnapshot function to listen to the data. So this function is going to go out and grab the data once to begin with and run this function when it gets it. So we log out the books to the console when we first load the page, but thereafter, if I was to add a new book or delete a book, that would trigger Firestore to send us back a new snapshot, and this function would run again so that we can output the books to the console, again, the new updated data. All right, so I hope that all makes sense. So let me save this now and we'll give it a whirl in the browser. Alright then, so when we first load the page, if I refresh, you can see it's performing that initial fetch to get the first initial snapshot of the collection, and we get these 4 documents right here. Now, watch what happens if I try to delete one. So this, the Wise Man's Fear, for example. I'm just going to grab this ID and then I'm going to paste it in here to delete the document. So as soon as I click on this, that should send out a request to delete the document from the collection in Firestore. It will delete it, and then that will trigger Firestore to send us back a new snapshot. The function is going to rerun in our code with that snapshot, and it's going to log out the new data to the console. So we should see 3 books this time as soon as I delete the book, and that's finished. So let me click this, and now we can see 3 books in this array. And if we open this up, we can see the Wise Man's Fear is no longer there. Awesome. Now the same is true for if I add a new book. So I can say the Wise Man's Fear up here, and then it's by Patrick Rothfuss. Press enter to add a new book. We should get a new snapshot back, and we do, and we can see that right here, 4 elements inside it, including the Wise Man's Fear. Awesome. So that, my friends, is how we set up a real-time listener or a subscription to a Firestore collection to get real-time data back as events occur in the collection. Okay then, my friends, so now we have our real-time subscription set up to our Firestore collection, so that every time there's a change in that collection, we get sent a new snapshot with all the documents inside the collection, and we're listing those in the console. Now right now we're just getting every single document inside the collection, but sometimes we might want to filter that out a little bit, so that we say, okay, go and grab me every book document that has a specific author, for example Brandon Sanderson or Patrick Rothfuss, and that would then only fetch us those documents from the collection. So we do that using what's known as a Firestore query, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. So the way we do this is basically updating our collection ref to be a query reference instead. So we need to import a couple of things at the top before we do this. I'm going to enter onto a new line first of all, then we import a query function, and also we're going to need a function called where that we use inside the query. Alright then, so now down here we basically want to rewrite this reference here so that it includes that query. So what I'm going to do is come down here and I'll do a little comment to say queries like so, and I'll say const q is equal to query, and then we invoke that function, and then we can pass in a collection ref first of all. So I'm going to copy that and paste it in here. So that's the first argument, right? Because we're saying, look, we want to get some documents from that particular collection. But then inside this query function, as a second argument, we can pass in the other function, which is the where function, and invoke that. And this is basically a clause saying, okay, well, fetch me any documents inside this collection where, for example, the author is equal to Patrick Rothfuss. So this where function takes in 3 arguments. The first argument is the field name or the property name. So we're going to say author. The second argument is some kind of comparison. So I'm going to say is equal to, double equals. And then the first argument is the value we want it to be equal to. For example, Patrick Rothfuss, like so. So now this is basically getting us a reference to any documents inside the books collection using this collection ref where the author value is equal to Patrick Rothfuss. And now instead of creating this onSnapshot function to just the collection ref, we pass in the query here instead. Okay, so now we're going to get real-time data whenever the data changes that includes the author property to be Patrick Rothfuss. So if I add a new book where the author is Patrick Rothfuss, then that will fire this function right here where we'll get a new snapshot. If I add in a new book where the author is not equal to Patrick Rothfuss, then we're not going to get a new snapshot. Does that make sense? So let's save this now and give it a whirl. So first of all, you'll notice when we first load the page, we only have 2 books inside this array. And that's because now we're filtering out any book that doesn't have an author to be Patrick Rothfuss. So we don't get that data. Any data we get must have that author because of that query we just made. Now, if I add a new book, so I'm just going to do a title called ABC DEF for the author. Now the author is not Patrick Rothfuss, right? So when we add this book, notice we don't get a new snapshot and we don't relog the books to the console because it wasn't included in that query, that author. However, if I add in a new book by Patrick Rothfuss, ABC, and then Patrick Rothfuss, like so, add the new book, then we should get a new snapshot because that is the data we're listening to, any data with an author property of Patrick Rothfuss. And we can see that new book right here. Now I'm also going to delete that book just to show you that we get a new snapshot when we delete a book whose author is Patrick Rothfuss as well. So let me delete it like so, and we can see the new snapshot down below. Awesome. Alright then gang, so when we retrieve documents from a collection, whether that be through the getDocs function or the onSnapshot function, the documents that we get back seem to be in no apparent order. They're not in alphabetical order when it comes to the author or the title or any other kind of property. But in actual fact they are. They're in order according to the ID. Now remember, Firebase automatically generates these IDs for us and they are random. So by ordering by ID, then they are in kind of a random order, okay, according to our data. But we can order our queries so that we can order them by properties. So I could say, okay, order them by author value, so they're alphabetical by order, or title, or some other kind of property. And that's what we're going to do now. Okay, so to do this is really simple. All we need to do is, first of all, import a function called order by from Firestore. Then down here, when we create the query, we need to pass it in as another argument. So after the where clause over here, I'm going to pass in the order by function. Now the order by function takes in an argument which is the property we want to order by. So for example, I could say order by title, and then we can pass in descending or ascending right here. So I could say descending, for example, as the second argument. Now if I save this and preview in the browser, then we're going to see this error in the console, and it's basically saying, look, we can't just get this query without first creating an index for it. So click on this link and that's going to open up your Firestore console to create an index. So just click on this button to do that right here, and this will just take a couple of minutes to do. And while the status is building, it means it's still building and this won't work. So we just have to wait for a few minutes. Alright then, so once you see this status as enabled, it means that we can go ahead and get that query where we're ordering by the title in descending order. So if we take a look over here and refresh, now if we open up this array, then we should see that it's ordered by the title. So you can see the wise man's fear, the name of the wind, and then ABC. So the letters nearer to Z are starting first, and then the letters nearer to A are at the end, because this is in descending order. If it was in ascending order, then the first one would be this, and then this, all right? So we've ordered by the title, but now what I'd like to do is create another property on our object right here, or on our documents called created at, and that will be a timestamp, and it will represent the time that a user added that book, and then we can order by that timestamp. So the first thing I'm going to do is delete all of these documents right here. Now to do that, I'm just going to go to our data in the Firestore. And by the way, I could have done it from here if I wanted to, but this the way is quicker, because I'm going to go over here and delete the collection. And if I type in the collection right here, it's going to delete all the documents inside that collection for us. So that now in the future, whenever we add new documents, we're going to add that timestamp value to it as well. Alright then, so first of all, we want to add a created at property to every new document that we create so that we can order by that created at property. So I could say created at right here, and we need to set that equal to be a timestamp. Now, we don't just use a date object or anything like that. When we're using Firestore, we use a special Firestore timestamp, and we need to import a function to create one of those. So up here, I'm going to import something called server timestamp like so. Now when we invoke that function, it creates a timestamp for us, which is stored in the Firestore documents. So down here, I'm just going to say server timestamp and invoke that to create a timestamp to be the value of this created at property. So now every new book we create is going to have that timestamp which says when the book was created. And then I want to order by that created at property. So I'm going to go over here and get rid of this. And then I'm just going to say by created at, like so. Now, by default, it's in ascending order. So I'm going to leave it right here. We don't need to pass in the argument ascending. And then also, if we wanted to, we don't have to have the where clause right here. If I just want to get every document, then I can delete this. It doesn't really matter, which is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to save this. Now we're going to add a few documents and try this out. Alright then, so we can see that the data is empty currently. So let's add some new documents. I'm going to say The Wise Man's Fear first of all, which is by Patrick Rothfuss, and then add that book. I'm also going to add in a new one by him, which is The Name of the Wind, and then Patrick Rothfuss. Alright, enter. And then I'm going to add in another one, The Way of Kings, that is by Brandon Sanderson, and press enter. So now they should be ordered by that created app property. So let me just open up this most recent snapshot right here, and we can only see one inside there. So what I'm going to do is actually just refresh to make sure we're getting the correct code. Okay, so now we see 3. And now inside here, we can see that we have a created app property in each of these individual objects, and they're now ordered by that created app property. We can see this order right here is the order that we added them. We added this one first, then this, and then this one. And if we add in a new one, let me add in the final Empire by Brandon Sanderson and press enter, that one should now also appear at the bottom. So you'll see Brandon Sanderson down here at the bottom, the final Empire, and the others are still in the correct order as well. Now you'll have noticed when I'm adding a new book now, I'm actually getting the data logged to the console twice. Let me just show you. A, B, C, D, E, F, add the book, and we can see the data logged twice. So why is that? Well, it's because we added on that timestamp. So when we do that, it sends the information to Firestore, it adds the document and we get a snapshot back, but then it takes a short amount of time for Firestore then to add the timestamp. And when it adds that to the document, it sends us back a new Firestore snapshot because the data has changed. Does that make sense? So that's why we're getting these two different things logged to the console right here every time we add a new document. Alright then, so we've seen now how to go out and grab an entire collection of documents using this function on snapshot, and also previously using the getDocs function as well. So that's how we get a full collection of documents. But what if we just want to go out and grab one document? Well, we can do that. All we have to do is import another function up here from Firestore. This time it's called getDoc, and this function grabs us a single document. So let me come down here and we'll flesh out this code. Now the first thing we need to do is make a document reference. Much like we did when we deleted a document, we created a document reference where we passed in the database, the collection, and the ID of the document into this doc function right here. So we need to do the same thing down here for the document that we want to get. So I'm going to create that. I'll say const doc ref, and this is not going to interfere with this constant right here because this is a local variable inside this function. So doc ref is equal to doc, then we invoke that. We pass in the DB, then the collection, which is books, and then we want to pass in a document ID. Now I'm just going to pass in an ID I've already grabbed from one of our documents. So it's going to go out and get a reference to that particular document. And then what I want to do is come down here and use the getDoc function to go out and get that document. And all I need to do is pass in the doc ref, like so. Now this returns a promise, so we can tack on a then method to fire a function when we have that document, and this function takes in the document as an argument so we can do something with it. All I'm going to do is log it to the console, so we'll log out the doc.data, remember that's a function to get that data, and then also the doc ID. Alright then, so let's see if this works. So now in the console, we still see the entire collection because we still have that subscription set up to the entire collection, but underneath that we also have the single document that we just grabbed. And notice this is the ID I used to get the doc reference. So that's how we can grab a single document. Now, much like before when we set up a subscription to a collection to get real-time data, we can also do that to a document as well. I could subscribe to a single document so that if that document ever changes, then Firestore will send us back a new version of that document after it's been changed. For example, if someone changed the author property, then it would send us back the document again so we could reuse that updated data. Now, the way we do this is very, very similar to how we created a subscription to a collection. We use this same function right here on snapshot. So I'm going to copy that and come down here and I'm going to paste it in. And then we need to invoke that function as well. Now inside here, all we have to do is pass in the doc ref instead of the collection ref. When we pass in a collection ref, that sets up a subscription to a collection, but now we're just subscribing to changes on a particular document. So as a second argument, all we have to do is pass in a function which is going to fire every time Firestore sends us back a new version of the document. So every time that document changes in the database. And all I'm going to do is log that to the console when it happens. So console.log doc.data, which is a function, and then also doc.id, much like we did up here. And in fact, I'm going to get rid of that now because we don't need that anymore, because we're setting up a real-time listener to this document instead. And remember, this also fires once initially when we first load the page. So we get that document once to begin with, and then thereafter, every time there's a change to that individual document in the Firestore collection. Okay, so I've actually got open two windows here. I've got the Firestore over here on the right, and I've got open this document, which we have a real-time listener set up to. And over here we see in the console we have that document, and that's the document that we're subscribing to, right? So we get it once initially, which is over here in the console. So now if I try to change this, let me just come to this, and I'll change this to a capital T, and then I'm going to update it. Now, because we're changing this, then Firestore should send us back a new version of the document, and we should fire that function inside the onSnapshot function. So let me update it, and we can see now we get back a new version of the document, and we can see the title is updated. Notice also we got back this set of documents as well, and that's because we have a listener set up to the whole collection, and the collection just changed as well. So it fired that function to relog out all of the new data inside that collection, and also the function right here to log out the single document as well. Alright then, my friends, so I've now shown you how to get documents, whether that's a full collection or single documents, how to add documents, and also how to delete documents. Next up, I'd like to show you how to update properties on an individual document. So to get us started, I've already created a bit of HTML at the bottom, and this is just another form, this time with a class of update. We have a label for the ID field right here. So the name of this field is ID because I want a user to enter in the ID of a book that we want to update. And then we have a button to submit the form. Now I've already attached an event listener to that form at the bottom down here. So we grab the update form using the query selector and this class. Then we add the event listener, which is a submit event. We fire a function when a user submits the form, and we prevent the default action. So it's in here now that we want to update a single document. So then to do this, we need to import another function. So let's go to the top, and I'm going to import update doc like so. So this is the function we need to update an individual document. So down here, the first thing we need to do is get a reference to a particular document that we want to update. So we've seen this before. We have a document reference here, and we also have a document reference here where we're deleting a document. So we want to get a document reference, and in fact, I'm just going to copy this line of code and paste it in right here. So we want a document reference. So we use the doc function, we pass in the database and the collection, and then we need the ID of the documents that we want a reference to. Now, at the minute, we're using the delete book form, but I want to use the update form instead. So update form like so. Then we want the name of the input, which is still ID. That's this thing right here. And then the value of that input. So that's our document reference. We now have that, and we now need to update the doc. So update doc, and we pass in the doc ref first of all, and then the second argument is an object, and we can pass in any properties here that we want to update. So I could pass in the title prop, like so, or the title property, and we'll just say this is updated title. You could set it to be a new title. It really doesn't matter what it is. Now, ideally, we might have a form where a user types in the new title and we'd get the value from that form, and we can output it dynamically here, much like we grab the value from another form field. But I don't really need to show you that. I just want to show you how to use this function right here to update the document. Now, we don't need to pass in all the different properties or fields into this update object. All it does is update the properties that we pass in. So it will leave alone the created at and also the author fields. It will only update anything that it sees inside this object. Alright then, so this is asynchronous, and we can tack on a then method to fire a function when this is complete. So all I want to do in here is reset the form. So update form like so, then dot reset. Alright, and then invoke that. So let's give this a whirl. So then we can see this form right here to update the book, and what I want to do is update this document right here. This is the document that we have a real-time subscription set up for, so that when we update that document, then Firestore is going to send us back a new version of it, and we're going to relog it to the console so we can see that update. So I'm going to grab this ID right here and paste it inside this form, and when I click on update a book, it should update this document right here, in particular the title property, to be updated book or something like that, or updated title. So let me click on this update a book function. Then we can see down here the item logged to the console again, and the title is now updated title. So that worked. It updated that book for us. Simple. Alright then, so now we've covered quite a lot about the Firestore database and how to work with that in Firebase version 9. So now I want to move on to how to use Firebase Auth in version 9 as well. Now Firebase Auth uses a JSON web token to authenticate users who might sign up, log in and log out of our applications. When a user's logged in, this web token is sent to the Firebase server on every request so that Firebase can authenticate the request. We can then use that to lock down other services so that only authenticated users can access certain features of your site, such as reading database data or uploading files. We're not going to delve into all of that in this series of videos, but I will be doing future courses about Firebase 9 showing exactly how all of that works. Anyway, the first step in using the authentication service is to enable it on the Firebase project. So to do that, head to the authentication tab first of all, and then click on email and password, and you want to hit this switch to enable email and password authentication, and then click on save. And by the way, you can use a load of other providers in Firebase Auth as well, such as Google, Twitter, GitHub, etc. But for the sake of these lessons, we'll be sticking to email and password. So now it's enabled on the back end in our Firebase project, we need to initialize this authentication service on the front end. Now to do that is really simple. All we have to do is import a function from the Firebase Auth library and then invoke that function, much like we did for the Firestore database. We imported a function right here and then we invoked that function. So let me first of all import, and we're going to do this on a separate line, much for the same reasons as we did on separate lines right here. Okay, so we need the getAuth function, and this comes from Firebase/auth this time. So we import the functions from the different parts of the Firebase library. This is authentication, this is Firestore, right? So now down here, all I'm going to do is say const, and I'm going to call it auth, but you can call it whatever you want, and set it equal to getAuth and invoke it. And now that initializes the authentication service for us. And we use this auth constant every time we want to do something with authentication, like sign up, log in, or log out. Alright then, so now we have Firebase Auth initialized right here. The first thing I'd like to show you is how to sign a new user up. Now to get us started, I've already created an HTML form down here. First of all, we have an H2, which says Firebase Auth. Then we have this form with the class of signup. Now we have a label for the email, and the name of that input right here is email as well. And we also have a label for password, and the name of that input is password. And we have a button to submit the form. Also, inside the index.js, if we scroll down, I've boilerplated a bit of JavaScript code as well, just to attach an event to this form right here. So we grab the form first of all using query selector and store it in signup form. Then we add an event listener to that, a submit event. We're taking the event object in the callback function, and we prevent the default action. So it's right here now that we want to sign a new user up. So the first thing we need to do is go to the top and import a function from Firebase Auth, and that function is create user with email and password. Some of these functions from Firebase Auth are seriously long. This is one of the longest ones. So let me just copy that so I don't have to type it out again, and come down here, and we want to use that function down here to create a new user. Now let me just paste this in and invoke it. Now inside this function we take in 3 arguments. First of all, we pass in the auth object. Remember, when we initialized the auth service, we stored that inside this auth constant. So we're passing that in right here. The second and third arguments are the email and the password, because remember, we're signing up with email and password. So we need to grab the email and password from these 2 form fields. This one with the name of email and this one with the name of password. So let's do that first of all. I'm going to create 2 constants. Const for the email, and we set that equal to sign up form which is our sign up form. And then we can say dot whatever the input name is called. So the first one is email, and then grab the value from that. Then we need the same for the password. So const password is equal to sign up form, spell this correctly, sign up form dot password, that's the name of the input, and then dot value. And then we can pass in the email and the password as arguments into this function. So this goes out and it signs up the user to Firebase Auth with that email and password. All right. Now this is asynchronous, takes some time to do, and it returns a promise. So we can tack on a then method, which fires a function when this action is complete. Now this function takes in an argument, which is a user credential object. And on that credential object, we have access to the user that's just signed up. So what I'm going to do is log that to the console, console.log credential.user. So we use the user property on the credential to get access to that user, right? Now also before that, I'll output a string, and that string is going to say user created like so, and then colon. All right, so I also want to reset the form after that. So we'll say sign up form, let me copy it from here, paste it down here, dot reset like so, and invoke it. Now also we can attach a catch block as well to fire a function if there's some kind of error. So let's do that. So we're taking the error as an argument into this function, and all I'm going to do is log that to the console if there is one. So error.message. So this error will be if maybe the email has already signed up for an account, or if the password is too short, or if the password is wrong, etc. And we'll see that error in the console now. And that's all there is to it, my friends. So we grab the email and password, and then we use this function right here to sign them up. We pass in the auth first, then email, and then password. And then we do this stuff afterwards. So let's save it and give it a whirl. All right, so now we can see this form right here. I'm just going to enter in Mario at netninja.dev for the email, and then the password will just say test. Now when we're signing up with Firebase Auth, the password has to be at least 6 characters long, so we should get an error back and it should be logged to the console. So if I try to sign up, we can see the password should be at least 6 characters. Now if you wanted, you could take this error and you could output it to the browser so the user knows that. What I'm going to do is just add on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, and then sign up, and then that should sign up the user, and we should see the user object right here who's just signed up. So we can see user created, and this right here is the user object. Now if we open this up, you can see a load of different information on the user, the access token, the email, and other things as well that we can set, like the display name. Now we've not done that, and we're not going to do that, but in future tutorials I might show you how to do that with Firebase 9. But we can see that the email is mario@netninja.dev. Now each user also has a unique ID as well, which is down here. So that's signing users up. Next, I'm going to show you how to log in with a user who's already signed up, and also how to log out again. Alright then, so now we've seen how to sign new users up by using this function right here, create user with email and password. Now I'd like to show you how users can be logged out and also logged in. So by default, when we create a new user using this function, Firebase automatically logs them in after they've signed up. So at this moment, a user would be considered to be logged in. So the first thing we'll look at is logging out. Now I've already created a bit of code inside index.html to take care of logging in and logging out. First, at the very bottom, we have this button with a class of logout, and that just says logout. So we're going to click on this to log the user out. We also have a login form as well with a class of login. We have a label for the email, and we have an input for the email with a name of email right here, a label for the password, and an input for the password as well, and a login button to submit the form. So we also have event listeners set up inside our index.js file. We have the logout button right here, which we get via the query selector. And then on that, we add event listener, which is the click event. Remember, we're just clicking on this button, not submitting a form. So we're going to react to that to log a user out. Then we grab the login form using the query selector, and we add an event listener, this time to be a submit event since we're submitting the form. Then we prevent the default action using the event object right here. So the first thing we're going to look at is signing the user out. So to begin with, we need to import a function to do this right at the top. So after this, I'm going to do sign out like so. That's the function we need to use to sign out or log out a user. And then down here, inside this event listener function, if I can find it, this one right here, we need to use that function to sign the user out. So all I need to do is say sign out, and then we pass in the auth object. Remember, that's stored in a constant up here when we initialize the auth service. So we pass in auth, and then this signs the user out. Now it's asynchronous and it returns a promise, so we can tack on a then method if we want to, and fire a function once this is done. And I can just say console.log the user signed out, and then also we can tack on a catch block if we want to as well. Let's spell this correctly, .catch, and that will fire a function if there's any kind of error, and we'll log that out to the console as well. So console.log error.message, like so. And that's it. That's all there is to signing a user out. So let's give this a whirl first of all. Okay, so since in the last lesson I signed up using the email mario@netninja.dev, when I signed up, Firebase automatically logged me in. So I'm currently logged in Firebase's eyes. Now, if I log out over here, then it's going to log me out. Now, nothing much is going to happen in our website, but we will see that message over here saying user logged out. So let's click on this and we can see the user signed out. So this is all working. That's how easy it is to sign a user out. Next, let's take a look at how we can log the user back in again. So to do this again, we need to import a function, and this is another long one. So let's import it, sign in this time with email and password. Alright, so let me just change this to a comma and then grab this long ass method so I don't have to type it out again. And then let's come down here to the last form submission, and I want to use this function to sign the user in. So let me paste it in, and inside here we pass in 3 arguments. First of all, our auth constant, then an email, and then a password. So we need to grab the values of the email and passwords from these inputs. So let's do that first of all. I'm going to say const email is equal to login form dot email, that's the name of the input, dot value, and then after that I'll say const password is equal to login form dot password dot value. So now we have those 2 values. I can pass them in as arguments, the email first, then the password, and that signs the user in. Now, since this is asynchronous and it returns a promise, we can tack on a then method to fire a function when this is complete. And again, much like when we signed a user up over here, we get the user credential back of that user who's just signed in. So we can take that into the callback function, and then we can log out the user if we want to. So I'll say console.log user logged in, and then we'll output credential.user. Remember, we use the user property to get the user object. Alright, we can also tack on a catch block as well to catch any kind of error in a callback function. And this is going to fire if maybe the password is incorrect or the email doesn't exist for that user, etc. So we'll just log that error to the console error.message like so. And that's pretty much all there is to it. So let's give this a whirl. Alright then, so first of all, I'm going to try and log in as a user that doesn't exist. So luigi@netninja.dev, and then I'll say test for the password and try to log in, and we should get an error back and it says the user is not found. Alright, so let's try Mario instead and then try signing up, or rather logging in, and we should get a different error. It says wrong password this time because test is not the password. But if I type test12345, which is the password, I should log in and we should see that user object. And we can see that right here. Awesome. So we can see that the email right here of the current user logged in is mario@netninja.dev. Now I can log out again. If I click on log out, then it says the user signed out. Awesome. So we've seen now, my friends, how we can sign users up, how to log them in and log them out. And when they're logged in, we can get access to this user object with things like their email on. And we could use that inside our template, if you like, on the web page. So we could have some kind of nav bar that says something like hello Mario@netninja.dev and display that in the actual HTML code. Now, we're not going to do that in this tutorial. We'll leave that for another day. I just want to let you know that this is the kind of things that you can do with this user object. Alright then, gang, so now we've seen how we can sign users up, log them out, and then log them back in again. And if we wanted to, we could set up a real-time subscription to the login status of the current user on the website, so that every time there's an authentication status change, for example, if a user logged in or out, then it would fire some kind of function, much like we set up a subscription to a collection in the database, but this time we can set it up to the auth state. So to do this, the first thing we need to do is import a function from Firebase Auth. And that function is called onAuth state changed. So let's import that, onAuth state changed, like so. And then down here we can use that function. So let's do it at the bottom of the page, onAuth state changed. And this is going to take in two arguments. The first one is our auth constant, and then the second one is a function which is going to fire every time there is an authentication change of the user on the website. So if I logged in, it's going to fire the function. If I log out, it's going to fire the function. If I sign up, it's going to fire the function, etc. Now this function right here takes as an argument the user. Now if I log in, that user will be the user who's just logged in. Same if I sign up, it will be the user that's just signed up. However, if I log out, that user is going to be null. So what I'm going to do is just log that to the console every time there's a state change in the authentication. So console.log, and I'll say user status changed, then a colon, and we'll output the current user, which is either the user just logged in or signed up, or null if they logged out. Now I'm also going to comment out the other console logs when we either sign out or sign up, so that the only log to the console is this every time there is a state change in the authentication. So let's save this and give it a whirl. Alright then, so to begin with, if I first refresh the page, we can see that the user status changed, and that's because initially Firebase is reaching out to the backend to see, look, do we currently have a user logged in? And it's returning with null, so no, we don't have a user logged in. However, if I am now to log in with Mario at netninja.dev and then test 12345, then we should see that function fire again, and this time the value of the user should be the user who logged in. So let's give this a whirl, log in, and we can see user status changed, and we have that user object right here. Now if I log out, it should fire the same function, but this should be null again because we've just logged out. So log out and we can see null. Now the same is true if I sign up. I'm going to say Luigi over here at netninja.dev and then test 12345. I'm going to sign up and we should see this function fire again, and when we do, we should see the user object. Awesome. So now we can see Luigi at netninja.dev, and finally if we sign out again, it should be null. Cool. So this is a good way to track the current authentication status of the user in your application. Alright then my friends, so there's one more thing I'd like to show you when it comes to Firebase 9 in this series, and that is how to unsubscribe from subscriptions. So currently we have 3 subscriptions set up. We have one to the collection of data, which sends us back a new snapshot every time there is a change in that collection, one to a single document, which sends us back a new document when there's a change to it, and one to the authentication status, which sends us back the user every time there's a status change. So it's good practice to unsubscribe from any subscription when you no longer need it. So I'm going to show you how we can do that for all 3 of these things right here. So then to begin with, I've already added on a new button at the bottom with the class of unsub, and that says unsubscribe from DB auth changes. So we're going to unsubscribe from everything in one go when we click on this button, right? So over in the index.js, I've also grabbed this unsub button using the query selector on this class, and then I've added an event listener to it, which is a click event. So when we click on this, we're going to fire some code. All right. So what we want to do in here is unsubscribe from all of the 3 things that we're subscribed to. So this one right here, where we subscribe to auth changes, but also up here we have a real-time subscription to a single document, if I can find it, right at the top. Okay, so this is the real-time data for a full collection. I think the document is down here somewhere. Let me try and find it. Okay, there it is. So we have that subscription as well. So we want to unsubscribe for all 3 of these. So what we need to do is basically just capture the return of all of these subscriptions in some kind of variable, because they all return a function, and that function is an unsubscribe function. So where we have the real-time collection subscription, I'm going to say const, and then you can call this what you want. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to call it unsub col for collection and set it equal to this. So this onSnapshot returns to us an unsubscribe function, and I'm storing that inside this constant. I'm going to do the same thing for the document subscription down here. So I'll say const unsub doc this time, since we want to unsubscribe from a document. And again, this returns to us an unsubscribe function which is stored inside this constant. And the same is true for the authentication status change one as well. So this also returns a function which is an unsubscribe function. So I can capture that in a constant as well. And I'll say unsub auth for that one and set it equal to this. So all we have to do is invoke all three of those functions inside here. First of all, I'll say console.log unsubscribing, like so, and then under that we'll do unsub col and invoke that function, unsub doc and invoke that function, and then finally unsub auth and invoke that function. So now we're unsubscribing from all of those subscriptions all in one go when we click on that button. So let me save this now and give it a whirl. Alright then, so we can see this button in the browser now, but I don't want to click it just yet because first of all I want to demonstrate that the subscriptions are still going on in the background. So I'll add a new document first of all over here, ABC in DEF, doesn't really matter, and we can see that new snapshot, that's a subscription. Let's try auth. So I'm going to try logging in as Mario at netninja.dev and then test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and then log in. We can see down here the user, so that subscription is still live, and if we log out we can see it fires again, but this time it's null. So these subscriptions are still going on in the background, right? Now watch what happens if I click on this button, then we can see unsubscribing, right? And now if I add in new documents, then we shouldn't get a new snapshot because we've unsubscribed, and we don't. The same is true for this. If I try to log in again, then we no longer see that function fire and the user log to the console because we've unsubscribed from all state changes as well. So that's how we unsubscribe from our subscriptions. And remember, it's good practice to do this whenever we don't need those subscriptions anymore. Alright then, so that's pretty much it for this series of videos about Firebase 9. If you want to learn more, definitely check out the docs because there are other features that you can use. For example, storage, which is a way we can upload files to Firebase. Hosting, so we can host our websites using Firebase, and also cloud functions as well, so we can run our own custom code on the backend. So yeah, if you want to learn more about Firebase 9, definitely check out the docs. So then my friends, I really hope you enjoyed this series and you learned something along the way. If you did, please don't forget to share, subscribe and like. That really means a lot. And if you want to access all of my YouTube courses without adverts, also get access to premium courses and early access courses as well, you can do at netninja.dev. You can sign up for NetNinja Pro, which is just $9 a month, and also half price for the first month with this promo code right here. And for that, like I said, you get access to